The wind howled across the Montana plains like a mournful spirit, carrying flecks of snow that stung Anna Sterling's cheeks as she stepped off the stagecoach in the shadow of Fort Benton's weathered buildings. It was December 1887, and the frontier town huddled against the Missouri River, its wooden storefronts dusted white, smoke curling lazily from chimneys into the iron-gray sky. Anna clutched her carpetbag tightly, her fingers numb beneath threadbare gloves. She was 24, but the fever that had stolen her strength 2 years prior left her looking like a ghost of herself, skeletal, as her father's aides had whispered. Behind gloved hands, her once full cheeks were hollow, her frame fragile beneath the heavy wool dress that hung loose on her bones. She had come with a fragile hope, fragile as the ice crusting the river's edge. Her father, Territorial Governor William Sterling, had promised this arrangement would give her purpose, a new beginning away from the stifling parlors of Helena where suitors turned away at the sight of her frailty. A union for peace, he'd called it, his voice clipped and official as he signed the papers. She was to be given, yes, given, like a parcel of land to Koda, a Lakota warrior of renown, whose alliance with the settlers had quelled raids along the northern trails. It was no romantic notion. It was politics wrapped in matrimony, a way to bind treaties with bloodlines. Anna had nodded then, her heart a quiet ache, believing perhaps this wild land might see her differently, without the pitying stares that branded her ruin back east. But as the stagecoach driver unloaded her lone trunk with a grunt, tipping his hat without meeting her eyes, the cold truth settled heavier than the snow. The townsfolk gathered at a distance, ranchers in oilskin coats, women bundled in shawls, their breaths fogging the air like unspoken judgments. Whispers cut through the wind. The governor's daughter, look at her, skin and bones, traded to a savage for peace. What kind of father does that? A burly man spat tobacco into the slush, his gaze raking over her with disdain. She won't last the winter. Too weak for this country. Anna's escort, a stern deputy from her father's office, shifted uncomfortably on his horse. This is as far as we go, Miss Sterling. Koda's been notified. He'll come for you by dusk. Town's no place for. Well, you understand. He avoided her eyes, the implication clear. No place for a woman bartered away, cast out from civilized society. With a nod, he spurred his mount and rode off, leaving her alone on the muddy street, the snowflakes melting cold against her skin. She stood there, the weight of rejection pressing down like the vast, empty sky. No warm welcome, no familial embrace, only the harsh bite of wind and the sting of eyes that saw her as broken, expendable. Her breath came shallow, fogging before her, as if her very presence dissolved into nothing. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet resolve flickered, faint as a distant lantern. She would not crumble here, not yet. The world might reject her, but she would endure, one frozen step at a time. The snow fell thicker now, blanketing Fort Benton's muddy streets as Anna trudged toward the only boarding house in town, her carpetbag dragging like a lead weight. The cold gnawed at her bones, each step a reminder of her frailty. But she kept her chin high, ignoring the sidelong glances from a shopkeeper sweeping his stoop. The boarding house was a sagging 2-story structure, its warped boards creaking under the wind's relentless push. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and boiled cabbage, and the landlady, a weary woman named Mrs. Calloway, squinted at Anna as if measuring her worth. "Room's 10 cents a night," Mrs. Calloway said, her voice sharp as the scissors tucked in her apron. "Pay up front. No charity here." Anna handed over a few coins, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from the chill that had settled deep in her chest. The woman's eyes lingered on Anna's hollow cheeks, her lips pursing. "You're the governor's girl, ain't you? Heard about your arrangement." She didn't say Koda, but the name hung in the air, heavy as the smoke from the potbelly stove. "Room's upstairs. Don't expect meals." Anna climbed the narrow stairs, her boots scuffing against splintered wood. The room was a closet of a space, a cot with a thin mattress, a cracked wash basin, a single window frosted with ice. She set her bag down, the thud echoing in the silence. Outside, the world was a blur of white, the Missouri River a distant murmur beneath the storm. She was alone, truly alone, with no father, no suitor, no community to claim her. The rejection from the townsfolk stung like a fresh wound, their whispers slicing deeper than the cold. Too weak, too broken, a sacrifice for peace. She knelt by her bag, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in muslin, a quilt her mother had stitched before the fever took her. The fabric was soft worn, patterned with stars in faded blue. Anna pressed it to her face, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and memory. It was her only tether to a life before judgment, before she became a bargaining chip. Her stomach growled. But she had no food, only a few coins left for tomorrow. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, its weight a quiet comfort against the ache in her heart. Sitting on the cot, Anna stared at the frost creeping across the window. The world outside was harsh, unforgiving, but she would not let it break her. She'd find a way to survive, sewing, baking, anything to keep her hands busy and her spirit intact. The wind howled, but she closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "You are enough." It was a fragile vow, but it was hers. Section 3. Starting over quietly, dawn broke over Fort Benton with a pale, reluctant light, the snow from the night before crunching underfoot as Anna ventured out into the frigid morning. The town stirred slowly, horses stamping in stables, smoke rising from forges, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing like a heartbeat in the stillness. Her breath clouded the air, and she pulled her mother's quilt tighter around her shoulders like a shield. Dusk had come and gone without Koda's arrival, leaving her with a hollow uncertainty. Was it rejection from him too, or merely the whims of the wild trails? She pushed the thought aside. Survival demanded action, not rumination. With her few remaining coins, Anna bought a small sack of flour, a bit of lard, and thread from the mercantile, ignoring the clerk's curious stare. "Governor's daughter baking pies?" he muttered to a customer as she left, but she held her gaze steady, refusing to let their words erode her. Back in her room, she set to work by the dim light of the window. Her hands, though thin and trembling at first, remembered the rhythms of necessity. She kneaded dough on the scarred wooden table, the scent of yeast rising like a faint promise amid the damp chill. By midday, she had 3 apple tarts cooling on the sill, their crusts golden and flaky, flecked with cinnamon she'd bartered for. She carried them door to door, her boots sinking into the slushy pads. "Fresh tarts, ma'am, a nickel each," she offered to a harried housewife hanging laundry, the wind whipping the sheets like ghosts. The woman eyed her suspiciously, her lips thinning. "Ain't you the one meant for that Indian? Folks say you're cursed, bringing trouble." Anna met her gaze without flinching, her voice quiet but firm. "Just tarts, ma'am, made fresh." The woman bought one, more out of pity than desire, but it was a coin in her palm, warm against the cold. Next came sewing, mending hems for the saloon girls, patching trousers for ranch hands. She sat in the boarding house common room, needle flashing in the firelight, the fabric whispering against her skin. Whispers followed her too, the townsfolk's judgments like thorns. "Too frail for frontier life," one rancher grumbled as she handed back his repaired shirt. "Bet she runs back east soon." A group of women at the general store clucked their tongues, bartered off like cattle per thing. "No decent man want her now," each word pricked, reopening old wounds from Helena's ballrooms, where suitors had seen only her illness, not her spirit. Yet Anna persevered, her resolve hardening like ice on the river. She baked through the afternoons, the warmth of the oven chasing the chill from her bones, and sewed into the evenings, the steady prick of the needle a meditation. Her body ached, but her heart grew steadier. She was building something here, not just a livelihood, but a quiet defiance. The world might label her ruined, but in the solitude of her labors, she found fragments of strength, piecing them together like scraps of cloth into something whole. Winter's grip held firm, but within her, a subtle thaw began. The days blurred into a rhythm of quiet toil as winter deepened its hold on Fort Benton, the snow piling against doorways like unspoken barriers. Anna's tarts had found a few steady buyers, ranch wives who grudgingly admitted the flaky crusts reminded them of home, and her sewing basket overflowed with mending from the livery stable hands. She moved through the town like a shadow, her steps measured, her eyes downcast but alert. The whispers hadn't ceased. If anything, they grew bolder in her absence of a husband. "Where's that warrior of hers? Left her high and dry, I reckon. Poor fool girl." But Anna let the words slide off her like melting snow, focusing instead on the warmth of dough under her palms, the tug of thread through fabric. It was on a bitter afternoon, the sky a leaden gray threatening more flurries, that she entered the general store for supplies. The bell above the door tinkled softly, a fragile sound against the creak of floorboards. Shelves groaned under tins of beans, bolts of calico, and sacks of coffee beans whose rich aroma cut through the musty air. Behind the counter stood Elias Hawthorne, the storekeeper, but it wasn't he who caught her eye. In the corner by the stove, sorting through a crate of pelts, was a man unlike the others in town. Tall and broad-shouldered, his skin the warm hue of sun-baked earth, his black hair tied back with a leather thong. He wore a fringed buckskin coat over denim trousers, a blend of worlds that marked him as Koda, the Lakota warrior her father had bartered her to. Yet here he was, not on horseback thundering across the plains, but quietly trading furs, his movements deliberate, unhurried, and afroze by the door, her heart a sudden flutter in her chest. He had come, after all, not with fanfare, but in this mundane place. She turned to leave, unsure, but his gaze lifted, dark eyes meeting hers across the room. There was no pity in them, no judgment of her frail form or the rumors that clung to her like burrs. Instead, a quiet curiosity flickered, as if he were seeing not the governor's discarded daughter, but a person standing firm against the wind. He nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement, and set down the pelt, wiping his hands on his coat. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice low and steady, laced with the soft cadence of his native tongue. It wasn't a question. He knew her. Anna straightened, the sack of flour suddenly heavy in her arms. "Koda," she replied, her tone even, though her pulse quickened. He approached slowly, his boots silent on the worn planks, the scent of pine smoke and leather following him. The trails were blocked by snow. "I came as soon as the pass cleared. No apologies, no excuses, just truth, plain as the frontier itself." She nodded, words caught in her throat. The store seemed smaller, the air thicker, with unspoken things. He glanced at her basket, where a few unsold tarts peeked from under a cloth. "You make these?" Genuine interest, not mockery. Anna felt a warmth creep into her cheeks, unbidden. "Yes, for trade." He reached into his pocket, producing a few coins, but his eyes held hers longer than necessary, seeing the resilience beneath her hollowed features. In that moment, amid the dust motes dancing in the slanted light, a thread began to form, not of obligation, but of quiet respect. As she left the store, the cold air sharp against her skin, and a glance back, Koda watched her go, his expression unreadable but kind. The world felt a fraction less cold. The week stretched on in Fort Benton, the snow deepening like layers of unspoken history, blanketing the town in a hush that mirrored Anna's guarded heart. She had taken to visiting the general store more often, not just for flour or thread, but for the quiet rhythm it imposed on her days. Koda was there frequently, trading pelts or picking up salt and ammunition, his presence a steady anchor amid the shifting drifts outside. He never spoke of the arrangement that bound them, never probed the scars of her fever or the bartered fate her father had imposed. Instead, their encounters unfolded in the present, simple and unadorned, like the clean lines of a freshly sewn seam. One crisp morning, as flakes swirled lazily against the store's frosted panes, Anna entered with a basket of mended shirts for the clerk. The air inside was warm, scented with coffee and tobacco, a respite from the biting wind that tugged at her shawl. Koda stood by the counter, examining a bolt of wool, his fingers tracing the weave with a care that spoke of someone who knew the value of enduring things. He glanced up as she approached, his dark eyes softening in recognition. "Cold out there," he said, his voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder over the plains. Anna nodded, setting her basket down with a soft thud. "It is, but the snow makes everything quiet." She didn't mean just the weather. The words hung between them, laced with the solitude she'd carried since arrival. He didn't press, only handed her a small sack of dried berries from his trade goods. "For your baking." They add sweetness. No fanfare, no expectation, just a gesture, practical yet thoughtful, acknowledging her craft without diminishing her independence. Their meetings grew from these small exchanges. Afternoons found her delivering tarts to the livery, where Koda sometimes tended his horse, a sturdy bay mare with a coat like polished chestnut. He'd watch her approach, the steam from the animal's breath mingling with the scent of hay and leather. Once, as she handed a ranch hand a patched coat, Koda stepped forward silently, helping her adjust her shawl against a sudden gust. His touch was brief, respectful, the warmth of his hand lingering on the fabric like a promise unspoken. "You walk far in this weather," he observed, not as criticism, but as quiet admiration for her perseverance. Anna felt the thread forming, delicate as spider silk in the winter light woven from shared silences by the river's frozen edge, where they'd sometimes pause on their separate paths, exchanging nods that said more than words. He saw her mending in the boarding house window one evening, lit by candlelight, and left a bundle of yarn on her step the next day, its colors deep reds and blues like the sunsets over the Montana hills. She never asked about his past raids or the treaties that scarred his people. He never mentioned her frailty or the whispers that followed her. It was her present he honored, the way she rose before dawn to knead dough, the steady prick of her needle defying the cold dot in these moments, and his resilience deepened, her heart thawing inch by inch. The world still judged, but with Koda, there was space to simply be. The affection bloomed unspoken, in glances and gestures, a slow warmth against winter's chill. Spring whispered its arrival to Fort Benton in tentative fits, the snow melting into rivulets that carved muddy paths through the streets, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth and budding sage. The Missouri River swelled with runoff, its waters murmuring like secrets long held. And as days had settled into a steadier cadence baking in the pale dawnlight, her hands stronger now, less prone to trembling as she rolled out dough on the boarding house table. The townsfolk's judgments lingered, sharp as the lingering chill, but she met them with a quiet poise, her resilience blooming like the first crocuses pushing through the frost. Koda's presence had become a gentle constant, woven into the fabric of her routine. He'd appear at the store with fresh pelts, or by the river bank where she sometimes walked to clear her mind, his silence a companionable space rather than an void. He never pushed for the union her father had decreed. Instead, he let it hang unspoken, respecting the distance she maintained like a fragile thread. Yet in his eyes, she saw a warmth that saw beyond her skeletal frame to the woman who rose each day, piecing her life together with needle and flower. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, Anna sat in her room by the window, the quilt from her mother spread across her lap. Her fingers worked deftly, stitching a small pouch from scraps of soft leather she'd bartered for, lining it with blue calico that matched the stars on the quilt. Inside, she placed a handful of dried berries, ones he'd given her weeks ago, and a tart wrapped in muslin, its crust infused with wild honey she'd foraged on a rare warm day. It was more than a gift. It was a risk, a quiet admission of the affection stirring within her, fragile as new leaves. To give was to expose her heart, to invite rejection anew. But the thought of his steady gaze compelled her. The next morning, she found him at the livery, brushing his mare with long, rhythmic strokes, the air thick with the scent of hay and horseflesh. She approached slowly, the pouch clutched in her hands, her boots sinking slightly into the softening ground. "For you," she said simply, extending it without flourish. Koda paused, his hand stilling on the brush. He took it gently, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent a warmth blooming up her arm, chasing the remnants of winter's cold. He opened it in silence, inhaling the tart's aroma, his dark eyes lifting to meet hers with a depth that needed no words. A small smile curved his lips, not broad but genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He nodded once, deeply, tucking the pouch into his coat pocket with care. "It means much," he murmured, his voice low, resonant. "No grand thanks, no probing questions, just gratitude, warm and silent, wrapping around her like the shawl she wore. As she walked away, the mud clinging to her hem, Anna felt a shift within. The gesture had bridged something intangible, her emotional risk met with respect. The connection deepened, symbolic in its simplicity, feeding her spirit as surely as the berries had sweetened her baking. The Fort Benton Spring Fair bloomed under a rare clear sky, the air alive with the hum of fiddles, the clatter of boots on wooden planks, and the laughter of children chasing hoops through the muddy square. Stalls lined the main street, their tables laden with jars of chokecherry jam, bowls of homespun cloth, and smoked trout wrapped in burlap, the scents mingling with the fresh tang of crushed grass and river damp. Anna walked among the crowd, her basket heavy with tarts and mended linens, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders despite the April warmth. The townsfolk's whispers still trailed her, the governor's girl, the one traded to the Lakota, but her step was lighter now, her frame less frail, nourished by months of labor and quiet resolve. She wore a simple dress of gray muslin, its hem patched but clean, her mother's quilt folded neatly in her basket as a reminder of her own stitching. Together, Koda was there too, not as a spectacle but as a quiet presence, bartering pelts at a stall near the church. His buckskin coat was dusted with trail dirt, his dark hair catching the sunlight as he nodded to a rancher. Their eyes met across the bustling square, a silent acknowledgement that steadied her amidst the crowd's clamor. Anna set up her wares on a borrowed table, arranging her tarts with care, their golden crusts flecked with sugar that sparkled in the sun. A few women paused, their curiosity outweighing their gossip. "These hold up well," one admitted, buying two, her tone grudging but fair. Anna smiled softly, her hands steady as she handed over the goods, her dignity unbowed by their sidelong glances. Then Koda approached, his stride and hurried, carrying a small bundle of furs. He placed it beside her table without fanfare. "For your sewing," he said, his voice low, meant for her alone. The gesture drew eyes ranchers, shopkeepers, wives all watching this unlikely pair, their whispers sharpening like knives. "What's he doing with her? She's no match for a warrior." Yet Anna held her head high, her gaze meeting Koda's with a quiet strength that matched his own. He lingered, helping her rearrange a stack of linens when a gust scattered them, his hands gentle but sure. The crowd noticed the way he stood close, not possessive but protective, his presence a shield against their judgment. A young girl tugged her mother's skirt, pointing. "Mama, she's not cursed. Look, he likes her tarts." The innocence cut through the murmurs, and a few faces softened, their assumptions faltering. As the fiddles struck up a waltz, Koda offered his hand not for a dance, but to guide her through the crowd to a quieter corner by the church steps, where wildflowers poked through the earth. "You belong here," he said simply, his eyes tracing her face, seeing the woman who'd rebuilt herself from scraps. Anna's heart swelled, the public moment a turning point, not loud, but profound, their bond a quiet defiance of the world's cold verdict. The fair hummed on, but for her, the air felt like spring's first true thaw. The Montana night settled over Fort Benton with a velvet hush, the stars piercing the sky like needle points of light above the dark silhouette of the plains. Anna sat on the boarding house porch, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her breath visible in the cool April air. The town was quiet, the fair's music long faded, but her heart still hummed with the memory of Koda's hand guiding her through the crowd, his quiet words, "You belong here," rooting themselves deep within her. The quilt from her mother lay across her lap, its faded stars soft under her fingertips, a symbol of the love she'd once known and the strength she'd stitched together since arriving. Koda appeared from the shadows, his steps silent on the damp grass, his buckskin coat blending with the night. He carried a small lantern, its glow casting flickers of gold across his face, softening the sharp lines of his jaw. He paused at the porch steps, not presuming to join her, but his eyes held hers with a gravity that made the air feel heavier, warmer. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice low, like the river's murmur beyond the town. Anna nodded, scooting to one side, her heart a quiet drumbeat as he settled beside her, the wood creaking under his weight. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the lantern's light dancing between them, the scent of pine smoke and leather mingling with the faint lavender of her shawl. And his fingers traced the quilt's stitching, nervous but steady. "I made this place mine," she said softly, the words spilling out unbidden. "But I didn't expect to feel seen." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of admitting her heart's quiet hope. Koda turned to her, his dark eyes searching, not for her past or her frailty, but for the woman who'd baked tarts in defiance of hunger, who'd sown through the cold to claim her space. "I see you, Anna," he said, his voice steady as the earth. "Not the governor's daughter, not a bargain for peace. You, your hands that make, your heart that stays." He paused, his gaze dropping to the quilt, then back to her. "You feed more than bodies with your work. You fed me here." He touched his chest, a gesture simple but raw, unveiling a truth that matched her own, and his breath caught the air between them charged with unspoken dreams. She leaned closer, drawn by his warmth, and he met her halfway, his hand finding hers atop the quilt. His touch was gentle, callous fingers intertwining with hers, a promise woven in silence. When their lips met, it was soft, tentative, a kiss born not of haste but of months of shared glances and quiet respect. The lantern flickered, casting their shadows as one against the porch, a moment of intimacy as vast as the starlit plains. They parted, and his eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a clarity she hadn't known she craved. "You reminded me who I am," she whispered, her voice steady now. Koda smiled, small and true, the night wrapping them in its quiet embrace, the Montana spring unfurled in earnest, the plains around Fort Benton softening into waves of green, dotted with wildflowers that nodded in the warm breeze. The Missouri River gleamed under the sun, its waters no longer choked with ice but flowing freely, a mirror to Anna's own quiet transformation. Her days were still filled with labor baking tarts for the mercantile, mending linens for the ranchers, but now they carried a new rhythm, one interwoven with Koda's steady presence. The townsfolk's whispers had dulled, not gone entirely, but overshadowed by the sight of Anna and Koda together, their bond a quiet rebuttal to judgment. One morning, as the scent of sage and fresh-turned earth hung in the air, Anna walked to a small plot just beyond the town's edge, where Koda had begun clearing land near his cabin. It was a modest stretch, framed by cottonwoods, the soil dark and promising. He stood there, sleeves rolled up, splitting logs for a fence, his movements sure and unhurried, the axe glinting in the sunlight. Anna carried her basket, not with tarts this time, but with a small bundle of seeds, larkspur, marigold, and beans bought with her earnings. A garden, she'd decided, would be her next act of building, a rooting of hope in this hard-won place. Koda paused as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow, his dark eyes brightening at the sight of her. "Seeds?" he asked, glancing at the bundle, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Anna nodded, kneeling to press her fingers into the soil, its cool dampness grounding her. "For a start," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Something to grow together." The words carried weight beyond the garden, a quiet invitation to a shared life, and Koda's gaze held hers, understanding the unspoken. They worked side by side that afternoon, turning earth, planting seeds in neat rows, their hands brushing now and then his calloused, her steady despite their slenderness. The air smelled of dirt and promise, the cottonwoods rustling like a chorus. Later, as they sat on a felled log, sharing a flask of water, Koda spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "This land, this life, it's yours too, Anna. If you'll have it, if you'll have me." No grand proposal, just truth, plain as the horizon. But it struck her heart like sunlight after winter. She looked at him, the man who'd seen her not as broken but as whole, and nodded, her throat tight with joy. "I will," she said, her hand finding his, the seeds they'd planted a symbol of their commitment. The fence post stood half-finished, the garden just begun, but in that moment, they were building a future quiet, real, and theirs. The summer sun hung low over Fort Benton, bathing the plains in a golden glow that softened the edges of the rugged town. It was late June 1888, and the air hummed with the scent of blooming clover and the faint musk of the Missouri River. Anna stood on the porch of Koda's cabin, now their cabin, her hands smoothing the folds of a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, its hem embroidered with tiny blue stars echoing her mother's quilt. The fabric brushed her skin, soft and grounding, a testament to the life she'd stitched together from fragments of rejection and resilience. Today was their wedding, not a grand affair, but a quiet union, as real as the earth beneath their feet. The ceremony unfolded in the open field beside their garden, where green shoots of carrots and beans pushed skyward, wildflowers weaving color through the rows. A small gathering stood in a loose circle. Elias Hawthorne from the general store, a few ranch wives who'd warmed to Anna's tarts, and a Lakota elder named Tala, whose weathered hands blessed them in soft-spoken words that blended with the breeze. Koda stood tall beside Anna, his buckskin vest replaced by a clean linen shirt, his dark hair loose, catching the light like raven's wings. His hand found hers, warm and steady, their fingers interlocking with the ease of two souls who'd learned each other's silences. No preacher presided. They spoke their vows under the open sky, the river's murmur a gentle witness. "I see you, Anna," Koda said, his voice low, resonant, carrying the weight of months spent building trust through shared work and quiet respect. "I vow to walk beside you, to plant and mend with you, to hold your strength as my own." And his eyes shimmered, not with tears but with clarity. "And I you, Koda," she replied, her voice steady, no longer fragile. "You reminded me who I already was, not broken, but whole." The words were their truth, unadorned, like the plain silver band he slid onto her finger, warmed by his touch. After the vows, the gathering shared a simple meal and his tarts. Venison from Koda's hunt, and Tala's cornbread, laid out on a cloth beneath a cottonwood tree. Laughter mingled with the clink of tin cups. The townsfolk's whispers of judgment long faded into acceptance, or at least indifference. As dusk settled, the elders struck up a soft drumbeat, and Koda pulled Anna into a slow dance, their steps unpracticed but sure, the grass soft under their boots. The world narrowed to the warmth of his hand on her waist, the scent of sage and leather, the rhythm of their shared breath. They ended the night alone on the porch, the quilt draped across their shoulders, stars above mirroring the ones stitched into the fabric. Anna leaned into Koda, her heart full, the ache of her past, a distant echo. The frontier stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but they faced it together, rooted in love that had grown like their garden, slow, resilient, true. In the silence, she whispered, "We're home," and they were.